On the Origin of Species, the Architecture of Life. The script is based on the work On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection by Charles Darwin, published in the year 1859. Chapter 1. The Clay of Life. When one looks at the living world through the prism of centuries, a certain plasticity becomes apparent, one that escapes cursory observation. Life is not a static sculpture, carved once and for all in granite, but rather resembles clay that yields to pressure, changing shape under the influence of external forces. However, before the researcher's gaze turns to wild recesses, jungles, and coral reefs, it must rest on what is closest, on the animals and plants that humanity has domesticated. It is precisely in the farmyard and the garden, in the shadow of the human hand, that the first great secret of variability is revealed. An analysis of the most ancient cultivated plants, such as wheat, or animals that have accompanied man since the dawn of time, leads to one undeniable conclusion. These organisms exhibit far greater diversity than their wild relatives. When one compares individuals of the same variety of cultivated plants, one sees differences that occur much more rarely in nature. This variability is not accidental. It stems from the fact that the conditions of life which man has created for his charges are less uniform and radically different from the harsh rules prevailing in the wild. Excess food, protection from the cold, climate change, these are factors that make the living organization unstable, plastic, and ready for transformation. This is a slow process, spread over generations. The nature of the organism and the nature of the conditions act in concert. Sometimes the change is sudden. Gardeners call these sports, as when a bud on a tree suddenly produces a branch with different leaves or fruit. More often, however, it is a process imperceptible to the eye on the scale of a single lifetime, visible only when epochs are juxtaposed. Chapter 2. The Architecture of the Pigeon. To understand the mechanism of these changes, one must lean over a single, concrete case. Charles Darwin, wishing to fathom the essence of variability, chose a subject seemingly common: domestic pigeons. He joined breeders' clubs, collected bird skins from India and Persia, and spoke with enthusiasts. What he discovered was an astonishing testimony to the power of selection. The diversity of pigeon breeds is so great that an ornithologist seeing them for the first time, unaware that they are domestic birds, would consider them not only separate species, but indeed representatives of different genera. The English carrier, with its massive wattle on the beak and elongated eyelids, seems to be a completely different being than the short-faced tumbler, whose beak resembles that of a finch. Different still is the pouter, inflating its crop to monstrous sizes, giving it an appearance at once grotesque and proud. And the fantail, spreading its tail into a fan of 30 or 40 feathers instead of the standard 14, seems to defy the anatomy of its cousins. These differences are not merely superficial. The facial bones change, as do the shape and size of the holes in the sternum, the number of vertebrae, and even the proportions of the wings and legs. Yet, despite this dazzling array of shapes, all these breeds share one blood. They all descend from a single, modest ancestor, the wild rock pigeon, Columba livia. The evidence for this common origin is striking. When two extremely different breeds are crossed, for example, a white fantail with a black barb, and their offspring are crossed again, in subsequent generations, a bird unexpectedly appears with blue plumage, black bars on the wings, and a white rump. This is a return to the primitive type, an atavism which, like an echo of long-gone centuries, resounds in the genes, reminding us that beneath the mask of the pouter or the tumbler, the same wild inhabitant of coastal cliffs still hides. Chapter 3. The Hand of the Breeder. Since forms so distinct can be derived from a single species, what force directs this? The key to the riddle is selection. It is the magic wand by which man calls into being forms he has dreamed of. This process has two faces. The first is methodical, conscious selection. The breeder, having an ideal in mind, precisely selects pairs that exhibit the desired trait to the strongest degree. Does he want sheep with longer wool? He crosses the woolliest ones. Does he want faster horses? He selects those that win races. Lord Somerville, speaking of sheep breeding, stated that it looks as if one had drawn a perfect shape with chalk on a wall and then gave it life. The second face is more subtle, yet equally powerful. It is unconscious selection. Primitive man, taming the wolf, did not plan to create a dachshund or a greyhound. He simply kept alive those dogs that were the most obedient, the most vigilant, or the best at hunting. In times of famine, the worst animals were eaten, the best spared. This simple mechanism, preferring some individuals at the cost of others, acting over millennia, slowly but inexorably transformed species. This force relies on accumulation. Nature provides small, barely noticeable individual differences. Every animal is slightly different. Man sums these differences up. He adds a millimeter to the length of the beak in one generation, another millimeter in the next. After 100 years, this sum of minor changes creates a new quality. What seemed fixed turns out to be plastic. The organization of the animal's body becomes, in the hands of time, something that can be modeled almost at will. Chapter 4. The Blurred Line. When we leave the safe ground of breeding and enter the world of wild nature, we encounter a fundamental problem. What exactly is a species? In textbooks and museum cabinets, species appear as distinct entities, separated from each other by a clear line. A lion is a lion, and a tiger is a tiger. However, the more closely a researcher looks at nature, the more these lines begin to blur. Observing the flora and fauna of vast areas, one perceives a multitude of forms that are difficult to classify unequivocally. These are the so-called doubtful species. Is a given plant a separate species or merely a local variety? Naturalists wage endless disputes over this. What is merely a variant for one is a full-fledged species for another. This uncertainty does not stem from the ignorance of researchers, but from the very essence of nature. If we assume that species are immutable creations, created separately, the existence of so many intermediate and doubtful forms is an inexplicable riddle. However, if we acknowledge that a species is merely a strongly marked variety, and a variety is an incipient species, everything becomes clear. Individual differences, those slight deviations that each of us sees in our children or in puppies of the same litter, are the first step. They are the seeds of change. When these differences become fixed and deepened, they become the traits of a variety. When a variety becomes isolated and changes further, it becomes a subspecies. And when the differences become so great that the intermediate forms perish, we are dealing with a new species. In nature, there are no leaps. There is continuity. The boundary between a variety and a species is fluid, arbitrary, imposed by man for the convenience of classification. In reality, we observe a ceaseless, slow flow of forms. We see this particularly clearly in large genera inhabiting vast territories. It is there where life teems most vigorously, where competition is greatest, that the most varieties arise. Common, dominant species, those that have achieved success, are the ones that change most willingly. They are like mighty trees that put forth the most new branches. Chapter 5. A Question to Nature. We stand, therefore, before an image of a world in which variability is the rule, not the exception. We see how man can utilize this variability to create a sheepdog from a wolf, or a juicy pear from a tart forest fruit. Man does this for his own benefit, for his own whim. A question thus arises, one that constitutes the foundation of all modern biology. Does there exist in nature a force analogous to the hand of the breeder? Is there a mechanism that selects, chooses, and transforms organisms not for a whim, but for the purpose of survival? Amidst the gales, drought, frost, and the eternal struggle of each against all, does a silent, invisible selection take place. One far more powerful and ruthless than anything man could imagine. The answer to this question leads us into the very center of a drama playing out in every drop of water and on every scrap of land. A drama in which the stake is life, and the judge, the stern law of necessity. Chapter 6. The Geometry of Survival. To understand the mechanism that drives evolution, one must look truth in the eye and perceive the brutal arithmetic of nature. Every living being, from the microscopic bacterium to the giant elephant, strives to reproduce in a geometrical ratio. This is an inexorable law. If there were no obstacles, if every born individual were allowed to survive and produce offspring, a single pair of parents would, in a short time, cover the entire earth with their descendants. Even the elephant, considered the slowest breeder of all known animals, is no exception. Darwin calculated that if a pair of elephants began breeding at the age of 30 and continued until 90, bringing forth 6 young in the interval. Then, after a period of 750 years, there would be nearly 19 million live elephants descended from that single pair. Reality, however, drastically verifies this potential. Look at the forest. Every tree produces thousands of seeds, and pollen floats in the air like a thick fog. Yet, of these thousands of potential beginnings, perhaps 1, perhaps 2, will grow into a mature tree. The rest perish. They perish eaten by birds, destroyed by frost, choked by other plants, or simply fail to find a place for themselves on a patch of fertile soil. The world is full, and resources are limited. This collision of an unlimited drive for life with the finite capacity of the environment births an inevitable conflict. It is, as Darwin called it, inspired by the economics of Malthus, the struggle for existence. This term is broad and metaphorical. It does not only mean the direct battle of fangs and claws, where a predator tears apart its prey. It signifies also, and perhaps primarily, the dependence of one being on another, and the struggle against the physical conditions of life. A plant on the edge of a desert struggles for existence against the drought. 2 mistletoe seedlings on a single branch struggle with each other for the sap of the host. A plant with sweet fruit struggles against other plants to ensure that birds eat its fruit and disperse its seeds, rather than the seeds of its competition. It is a silent, invisible struggle taking place at every moment, in every corner of the globe. Chapter 7. The Tangled Web. These dependencies are often so complicated that they escape perception until someone points a finger at the threads connecting seemingly distant phenomena. Nature is not a collection of independent entities, but an intricate web in which pulling on one string causes vibrations at its furthest end. Consider the example of a meadow near an English village. Red clover is a plant whose pollination depends almost exclusively on humble bees. Other insects are unable to reach its nectar. If humble bees were to vanish, red clover would become sterile and disappear from the landscape. However, the number of humble bees depends largely on the number of field mice, which destroy the combs and nests of these insects. Thus, the more mice, the fewer humble bees, and the worse for the clover. But let us go further. The number of mice near human settlements depends directly on the number of cats. Thus, one arrives at an astonishing chain of cause and effect. The presence of cats in farmyards favors the abundance of clover in the meadows. The cat hunts the mouse. The mouse does not destroy the humble bee's nest. The humblebee pollinates the clover. This shows how deeply the existence of one species is intertwined with the fate of others, often in a completely non-obvious way. The introduction or removal of a single element from this puzzle can shatter a balance built over millennia. The battle in nature is waged incessantly, though one most often sees only its peaceful face. One admires the singing of birds, the richness of insects, the green of the forest, forgetting that this harmony is the result of ruthless selection. One forgets that the birds singing so carelessly feed on insects, destroying life every minute, and that they themselves fall victim to predators or the cold. Every creature lives only because it has won the lottery of survival, in which most tickets are blank. Chapter 8. Natural Selection. In this constant struggle, in this battle against hunger, cold, and competition, what chances does the individual have? Here the subject returns to variability, discussed in the context of pigeons. Since man can select small differences in breeding, can nature not do the same? Indeed, it can. And it does so, but with infinitely greater precision. Man selects only for his own good. Nature selects only for that of the being which she tends. Man looks only at superficial characters. Nature penetrates every nerve, every vessel, every instinct. The mechanism is simple, yet brilliant in its simplicity. If any variation appears in a population, however slight, that gives an individual an advantage in the struggle for existence, be it better sight, faster legs, or resistance to frost, that individual has a better chance of surviving. Surviving, it has a better chance of producing offspring, and its offspring will inherit this advantageous trait. On the other hand, any harmful variation, even in the slightest degree, condemns the individual to destruction. This preservation of favorable variations and the rejection of injurious variations, Darwin called natural selection. Or, using the terminology of Herbert Spencer, the survival of the fittest. Natural selection acts incessantly, day by day, hour by hour. It scrutinizes the entire living world, rejecting what is bad, preserving and adding up all that is good. It works silently and insensibly, rushing nowhere. Its tool is time, millions of years, during which small, almost imperceptible modifications accumulate, creating organs of unimaginable complexity and adaptations of perfect efficiency. Chapter 9. Two Phases of Selection. Let us compare once again the work of man with the work of nature. A sheep breeder in Saxony ensures that his flock has the best wool. He protects them, feeds them, selects the best rams for breeding. But suffice it for him to abandon his flock to fate, and within a few generations, these noble animals would either perish or revert to a wild state, losing their beautiful fleece, which in the wild would be only a burden. The work of man is transient because it is artificial. The works of nature are different. They are truer. Traits shaped by natural selection are ingrained in the very essence of the organism. They are an answer to the real requirements of life, not to an aesthetic whim. That is why natural species are so perfectly adapted to their niches. The woodpecker does not have its beak and tongue because it pleased someone, but because for thousands of generations, woodpeckers with slightly harder beaks and slightly longer tongues won the fight for food hidden beneath the bark of trees. This selection concerns not only physical traits, but also behaviors. In the animal world, there exists another type of selection, often less bloody but equally vital: sexual selection. Here, the struggle is not for survival, but for the possession of females. The victor need not kill the rival. He need only defeat him by strength, as with deer fighting with antlers, or by charm, as with peacocks spreading their tails. He who finds no partner dies without issue. His genes perish, even though he himself may live to a ripe old age. Sexual selection explains the existence of traits that, from the point of pure survival, seem senseless or even harmful. The peacock's tail hinders escape from a predator, but it is necessary to pass life on. It is nature in its complexity, balancing between safety and reproduction. And the judge in this dispute is always the success of the offspring. Chapter 10. The tree that grows slowly. However, this process requires something that is difficult for the human mind to grasp: vast amounts of time. Natural selection does not act in leaps. Natura non facit saltum. Nature makes no jumps. This is one of Darwin's key theses. Evolution is a process of the slow accumulation of small changes. Many critics asked, how is it possible that from one form another arises, completely different, by way of such small steps? Should we not see around us an infinite number of intermediate forms? Why do species seem so well defined? The answer lies in the very nature of selection. New, improved forms displace and exterminate their less perfect parents. Competition is strongest between forms that are most like each other, because they occupy the same niche, eat the same food. An improved variety of wheat displaces the old variety. An improved wolf displaces the primitive wolf. That is why transitional forms are rare, because they quickly perish, replaced by their better successors. Thus, one sees only the tips of the branches of the great tree of life, the current species. One does not see the boughs and trunks that have withered and vanished into the darkness of the past. But the fact that they are unseen does not mean they did not exist. Traces of their existence are recorded in another way, which will be recounted when one looks into the depths of the earth. Now, however, one must face the greatest doubts. For can every structure, even the most complicated, truly be explained in this way? What of the eye, which is a masterpiece of optics? What of the instinct that compels the bee to build perfect hexagons? Chapter 11. Laws of Variation. Before we delve into the greatest dilemmas of the theory of natural selection, we must look closer at the very matter of change. What makes one individual different from another? Darwin, although he did not know genetics, a science born long after him, mapped out the laws governing inheritance with remarkable intuition. He knew that chance is merely a name we give to our ignorance of causes. One of the key mechanisms he perceived is the effect of the use and disuse of parts. An organism is not a fixed solid, but reacts to the way it lives. Look at the domestic duck. Compared to the wild duck, its wing bones are lighter and its leg bones are heavier. Why? Because the domestic duck walks more and flies less. A change in habits, reinforced over generations, entails a change in body structure. Even more drastic examples are cave-dwelling or subterranean animals, like the mole. Its eyes are reduced to microscopic size, sometimes even overgrown with skin. Natural selection did not promote good vision in the darkness. Indeed, it might have favored its atrophy, as a delicate organ in narrow tunnels would be prone to injury and infection. That which is unused withers. Another fascinating phenomenon is the correlation of growth. The organism is a whole so closely tied together that a change in one place entails unexpected consequences in another. Breeders know that cats with white fur and blue eyes are almost always deaf. Pigeons with short beaks have small feet, and those with long beaks, large feet. A change in one trait, promoted by selection, drags with it an avalanche of accompanying changes, which at first glance may seem accidental or purposeless. Chapter 12. Organs of Extreme Perfection. However, when we look at certain organs in the natural world, the theory of slow, small changes faces a powerful challenge. This is the moment when Darwin demonstrates the greatest intellectual honesty, openly admitting, to suppose that the eye with all its inimitable contrivances could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. The eye is a masterpiece of engineering, a lens focusing rays, an iris regulating the amount of light, a retina correcting spherical and chromatic aberration. How on earth could a blind, mechanical process create something so complex? What would a half product of an eye look like, and what purpose would it serve? The answer lies in gradation. To understand the evolution of the eye, one must not look only at the eagle or man. One must look at the entire living world. On the lowest rungs of the ladder of life, we find beings in which the eye is merely a cluster of pigment coated with a transparent membrane, a simple nerve sensitive to light. Such an organ does not see images, but distinguishes day from night, which for a simple organism is the difference between life and death. From this point, nature leads us through an infinite series of improvements. In some crustaceans, we see only pigment. In others, a depression appears, allowing the direction of light to be determined. In still others, the depression closes, creating a simple lens. Each of these steps, every single, even the slightest improvement in sharpness or range of vision, gives the possessor an advantage. Natural selection need not create perfection at once. It suffices that it creates something slightly better than what the competition possesses. Millions of years of such polishing, adding millimeter by millimeter, grinding the curvature of the lens, have led to the creation of organs that today fill us with awe. It is not a miracle, but the effect of the accumulation of infinitely many small benefits. Chapter 13. Modes of Transition. Critics also asked, how can an organ serving one purpose transform into an organ with a completely different function? How on earth could a fish, breathing with gills in water, give rise to animals breathing with lungs on land? Surely the transitional form would have to suffocate. Here, observation of organs that perform two functions simultaneously comes to the aid. The swim bladder in fish serves mainly to regulate the depth of immersion. It is an internal balloon. But in some fish, living in waters poor in oxygen, this bladder is highly vascularized and serves as an additional respiratory organ, an auxiliary lung. It suffices for the fish to begin spending more time in shallow, muddy water, or even on the bank. And natural selection will begin to favor those individuals whose swim bladder absorbs oxygen better. The hydrostatic function slowly gives way to the respiratory function. What was a balloon for swimming becomes a lung for breathing. Nature is a master of recycling, constantly adapting old structures to new tasks. It is similar with flight. We do not need to assume that birds appeared suddenly. Look at squirrels. There are species that have a fold of skin between their paws, allowing them long leaps, almost gliding flight. Such a flying squirrel does not fly actively like a bat, but can move from tree to tree faster than a predator running on the ground. This is a huge advantage. It is easy to imagine how, over millennia, this fold of skin enlarges. The muscles strengthen until finally, a wing is formed. Each intermediate stage was useful. Each gave an advantage. Chapter 14. Nature makes no jumps. All these examples lead to one fundamental principle, which Darwin repeats like a mantra. Natura non facit saltum. Nature makes no jumps. Evolution is a continuous, fluid process. If we see sharp boundaries in nature, the sudden appearance of complicated organs, it is an illusion resulting from our lack of knowledge or the incompleteness of the record. The theory of natural selection requires that we acknowledge that every complex structure is the sum of thousands of slight modifications. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous, successive, slight modifications, Darwin's theory would absolutely break down. But, as the author himself states with the certainty of a researcher who has devoted his life to analyzing facts, I can find out no such case. Nature is thrifty, but patient. There is no place here for sudden creation, for the magical appearance of a ready-made eye or wing. There is, instead, an unimaginably long process of trial and error, in which the judge is death, and the reward is life. It is a vision that strips nature of a certain kind of fairy tale magic, but gives it, in return, the majesty of logical necessity. However, if this process is so fluid and continuous, why do we not see intermediate forms everywhere? Why is the world not full of cat dogs and fish amphibians? Why do species seem so clearly separated? To answer this question, we must descend from the level of biology to the level of another science, we must look into the depths of time and rocks. We must open the great book of geology, which, unfortunately, turns out to be a book heavily damaged. Chapter 15. The Spirit of the Machine. We have crossed the threshold of physical form. We have understood how natural selection can sculpt a beak, a wing, or an eye. However, an animal is not merely a mechanism of bone and muscle. It is also a sentient, acting being, driven by an inner compulsion we call instinct. Does this invisible force, which commands a migratory bird to fly south and a spider to weave an intricate web, also succumb to the strict laws of evolution? Many thinkers considered instincts a direct gift, a divine spark implanted in the animal, independent of experience and learning. Darwin, however, approaches the psyche with the same cold objectivity as anatomy. He asks, are instincts variable? Do individuals with slightly different habits occur within a single species? The answer is yes. Even in such a rigid corset of behavior as instinct, there exists a margin of variability. One bird builds its nest slightly more carefully than another. One bee is more aggressive. If this slight difference in behavior gives an advantage, if a bird that builds its nest higher protects its chicks from a fox, then this trait will be passed on. Over generations, habit becomes second nature. And finally, instinct. Consciousness or planning is not needed here. The mechanism of selection suffices. Look at the cuckoo. Its instinct to lay eggs in others' nests seems a cruel freak of nature. Yet for the cuckoo, it is a winning strategy. A female that accidentally laid an egg in another species' nest and whose chick was reared by foster parents could migrate earlier, save energy, and lay more eggs. Her daughters inherited this parasitic habit. Step by step, the maternal instinct vanished, replaced by the instinct to deposit eggs. And cuckoo chicks evolved to instinctively eject their foster siblings from the nest, securing exclusive access to food. Chapter 16. Slavery in the Insect World. One of the most shocking examples of the evolution of instinct is the phenomenon of slavery among ants. There are species, such as Formica sanguinea, the slave-making ant, which raid the nests of other ants, kidnap pupae, and raise them as their own. The workers hatched from them have no awareness of their origin. They work for their captors, feed them, build the anthill, defend the entrance. How could something so complex, and from a human point of view, so immoral, arise? Darwin proposes a fascinating reconstruction. Perhaps originally ants kidnapped pupae of other species solely as food. Some of these pupae, stored in the anthill, might have survived and hatched before being eaten. They instinctively undertook the work they were created for. They began cleaning the nest and feeding the larvae of the hosts. For a colony that possessed such accidental helpers, this was a huge benefit. They could focus on defense and reproduction, offloading domestic duties onto the slaves. Natural selection thus began to favor those ants that had a stronger instinct to kidnap pupae, rather than eating them immediately. Evolution took two paths here. In the slave-making ant, the dependence is not yet total. These ants can build nests and acquire food themselves, although they willingly use slaves. But in another ant, Polyogus rufescens, the Amazon ant, the process has gone so far that it has become a trap. Amazons have mandibles transformed into powerful sabers, ideal for fighting, but useless for work. Without slaves, Amazons die of hunger even with food right under their noses, because they cannot eat by themselves. This is dramatic proof of how natural selection, guided by immediate benefit, can drive a species into a dead end of total dependence. Chapter 17. The Geometer without a compass. However, the greatest challenge to the theory of instinct seems to be the honeycomb of the hive bee. The hexagonal cells, built of wax, are a masterpiece of architecture. Mathematicians have long marveled at the fact that this shape allows for the storage of the greatest amount of honey with the use of the least amount of wax. How on earth did a small insect possess geometric knowledge that took man centuries to acquire? The answer lies not in divine inspiration, but in the economy of survival and gradation. Not all bees build so perfectly. Humblebees create simple, irregular pots. Other bees, like the Mexican Melipona, build cylindrical cells which, touching each other, form walls that are flat but not perfectly hexagonal. The hive bee is simply at the top of this engineering ladder. Wax is an energetically costly substance. To produce a kilogram of wax, bees must consume over a dozen kilograms of sugar. In conditions of scarcity, every saving of wax gives an advantage. Bees that built cells closer together, so that their walls merged and became common, saved material. The mechanism is simple. The bee gnaws out wax at regular intervals. When many bees work side by side, gnawing out cylindrical holes in soft wax, at the points of contact, the walls become flat under the pressure of neighboring cells. The hexagon is not the result of calculations in the bee's brain, but the result of physics and a simple instinct to maintain a constant distance. It is natural selection, promoting swarms that use the least wax, that brought this mechanism to the perfection we admire today as divine geometry. Chapter 18. The Mystery of Sterility. Let us leave the world of instincts and return to a fundamental problem that kept naturalists awake at night. If species arise from varieties through slow changes, why does crossing a lion with a tiger produce offspring, but rarely? And if it does, it is sterile, like a mule. Whereas crossing a greyhound with a dachshund produces fully fertile mongrels. Where does the boundary lie? For centuries, the belief prevailed that the sterility of hybrids, interspecific crosses, was a special law of nature. A barrier set by the Creator to prevent the mixing of species and to maintain order in the living world. Darwin demolishes this view. He demonstrates that sterility is not an absolute boundary, but a gradable trait. There are plant species that cross easily, but their seeds are weak. Others cross with difficulty, but if they succeed, the offspring are strong. Still others produce completely sterile offspring, and others partially fertile. There is no sharp dividing line here, as one would expect from a special law. According to the theory of selection, hybrid sterility is not an adaptive trait. An animal gains no benefit from the fact that its offspring will be sterile. It is rather a side effect, an accident at work. When two species evolve separately for a long time, their reproductive systems, their physiology, their cellular chemistry differentiates so much that upon combination, they simply do not fit together. Like two machines with different parts that jam when assembled. The hybrid embryo dies or develops defectively, not because nature forbids it, but because the genetic instructions from father and mother are too divergent to create a harmonious whole. In contrast, varieties of the same species, like dog breeds, are still close enough that their systems are compatible. Sterility is thus a measure of evolutionary distance, not a magical barrier. It is proof that species have drifted apart in the process of long-term modification. Chapter 19. Fossilized History. So we have a mechanism. Natural selection acting on physical and instinctive variability. We have an explanation for reproductive barriers. But this theory has one weak point, which we mentioned earlier. The lack of intermediate forms in the fossil record. If life is a flowing river of changes, why do rocks show us separate frames of a film rather than continuous motion? Geology, though powerful, is a science of absences. Darwin compares the geological record to a great book of world history, of which only the last volume has been preserved, and even that is incomplete. Of this volume, only a short chapter has survived here and there, and of every page, only a few lines. The conditions for the formation of fossils are extremely rare. An animal must die in water, be quickly covered with mud, and this layer must harden and survive millions of years without upheaval and destruction by erosion. It is a lottery in which 1 in a billion wins. Moreover, most changes occur in small and isolated populations, which further reduces the chance of preserving a trace. That is why we do not see every minute of Earth's life in the rocks. We see only rare snapshots. We see species A in the lower layer, and species B in the upper layer. We do not see the 1,000 generations that connected A to B, but the fact that we do not see them does not prove they were not there. Does the lack of letters from an ancestor prove that the ancestor did not exist? However, when we manage to find rare fossil forms, they often turn out to be precisely those sought-after links. Archaeopteryx, half reptile, half bird, is just such a letter from the past that miraculously survived to confirm that the boundaries between classes are not eternal. Rocks are silent about many things, but when they speak of change and of migration, which is another key to the riddle of life. Chapter 20. The Geography of Life. If a traveler were to move along the equator, visiting three great landmasses, South America, Africa, and the archipelagos of Southeast Asia, they would be struck by a certain paradox. The climate in these places is almost identical. Humidity, temperature, soil, everything seems to favor the same forms of life. Yet, the fauna and flora of these lands are radically different from one another. In the forests of the Amazon, we do not meet the elephants or gorillas that rule the African jungle. In Africa, it is futile to look for sloths, anteaters, or toucans. Why would the Creator, assuming separate acts of creation, populate identical environments with such different beings? The theory of natural selection offers a simple yet profoundly significant answer here. Inheritance and barriers. Organisms on a given continent resemble each other not because the climate shaped them in the same way, but because they are related. They are the descendants of the same ancestors who colonized that land in the remote past. The differences between continents result from the existence of barriers, oceans, deserts, high mountain ranges, which prevented free migration. The Atlantic Ocean is an impassable gulf for most terrestrial mammals. Therefore, evolution in America and in Africa followed completely different tracks, even though the stage on which it played out had similar scenery. The barrier is the key. Where barriers are weak, species mix and homogenize. Where they are impassable, life differentiates, creating unique, endemic worlds. Chapter 21. Accidental Sailors. However, to understand the distribution of organisms, we must first examine how they travel at all. It is not about great herd migrations, but about those rare, accidental events that change the face of the biosphere over millions of years. Darwin devoted much time to experiments that seemed trivial to his contemporaries, but turned out to be crucial. He soaked seeds of various plants in salt water for weeks to check if they would retain the ability to germinate. It turned out that many of them, after a month of drifting in sea brine, could still yield a crop. He calculated that with the average speed of ocean currents, a seed could travel 1,000 miles in this way and colonize a new land. But that is not the only way. Seeds travel in the crops of birds, which, driven by gales, can fly huge distances over the ocean. They also travel stuck to the mud on birds' feet. From a single cup of mud taken from the edge of a pond, Darwin grew over 500 plants of different species. This means that a single bird landing on a distant island can bring a whole botanical garden in the mud on its feet. Drifting timber, icebergs carrying earth and stones, and even whirlwinds. Nature disposes of an arsenal of transport means which, though unreliable and rare, becomes certain on a geological timescale. It is precisely these accidental means of dispersal that explain why we find European plants on the Azores or alpine flora on the peaks of distant mountains. Life is expansive. Every species strives to occupy every available scrap of space, and the only thing stopping it is the physical impossibility of reaching it. Chapter 22. The Solitude of Islands. The most convincing evidence for the role of migration and barriers is provided by oceanic islands, solitary scraps of land that emerge from the sea as a result of volcanic eruptions and were never connected to a continent. Tenerife, Hawaii, the Galapagos. Their fauna and flora constitute a record of an extraordinary experiment of nature. It is a striking fact that on islands distant from land by more than 300 miles, one almost never encounters amphibians, frogs, toads, or newts. Why? Conditions on volcanic islands are ideal for them: humid, warm, full of insects. When man artificially introduced frogs to Madeira, they multiplied by the thousands. Their absence, therefore, does not result from maladaptation. The answer is brutally physical. Amphibians and their spawn die in contact with seawater. They are unable to cross the ocean. The Creator did not place them there, and they themselves could not swim there. On the other hand, on these same islands, we often encounter mammals, but of only one order: bats. Bats can fly, so they can overcome the barrier that is impassable for a frog or an elephant. Is it not puzzling that terrestrial mammals are missing on islands, but flying mammals are present? If species were created independently, why did bats arise on islands, but frogs did not? The theory of evolution explains this effortlessly. The inhabitants of islands are the descendants of those few colonists who managed to reach them. Those who could not cross the sea are absent. Chapter 23. Archipelago of Secrets. A glance at the Galapagos Archipelago, a group of islands in the Pacific several hundred miles off the coast of South America, brings an even deeper understanding. Darwin noticed a phenomenon there that shook his worldview. Most animals and plants in the Galapagos are endemic, species found nowhere else on Earth. And yet, despite their uniqueness, they bear the clear, unmistakable stamp of America. The iguanas, finches, and mockingbirds of the Galapagos differ from their cousins on the continent, but in their structure, in their type, they are undeniably American. They do not resemble the fauna of the Cape Verde Islands, which lie in a similar climate but off the coast of Africa. The species there are of the African type. The conclusion is singular. The Galapagos were colonized by arrivals from America. These were few, accidental colonists who, driven by storms or carried by currents, ended up on virgin land. In isolation, under new conditions, without ancient enemies, they began to evolve. They changed to better utilize local resources, giving rise to new species which, however, still bear the traits of their American ancestors, like a family name. Moreover, each island of the Galapagos archipelago possesses its own unique species. Tortoises from one island have a different shell shape than those from a neighboring island, separated by only a few dozen miles. The straits between the islands, though narrow, are deep and have strong currents, making them effective barriers. Isolation breeds diversity. Darwin saw evolution in action here, a laboratory where new branches constantly grow from a single trunk. Chapter 24. The Ice Age and the Migration North. The history of species distribution would be incomplete without considering climate change. The Earth has not always been as we know it today. Geological evidence speaks clearly of a recent ice age, when the northern hemisphere was shackled in ice. This cold breath of the north had a colossal impact on the migration of species. When the ice advanced southward, the inhabitants of the temperate and Arctic zones had to flee before it toward the equator. Flora and fauna that live in Sweden today migrated all the way to the foothills of the Alps and Pyrenees, displacing warmth-loving species. The entire living system shifted south. When the climate began to warm and the ice retreated, the reverse process occurred. Arctic species, unable to bear the heat, retreated north, following the melting glacier. But some of them chose another route of escape from the heat, escaping upwards. Climbing the peaks of the Alps, the Pyrenees, or the White Mountains in America, they found cool asylums, islands of cold in a sea of warm climate. That is why on the mountain peaks of Europe and America, we find the same plant species as in the distant Arctic. The saxifrage that blooms in the snows of Lapland also grows on alpine passes, separated from its sister by thousands of kilometers of lowlands where it would not survive a single day. These are not two independent acts of creation of the same plant. They are relics of a great migration, witnesses to an epoch when frost connected these distant lands into one system. Chapter 25. Unity in Diversity. Geographical analysis leads us to a powerful synthesis. We see that the distribution of life on Earth is not chaotic, nor dictated solely by the whims of climate. It is the result of history. Every species arose in one place, in its center of creation, and radiated from there in all directions until stopped by barriers or competition. The similarity of fauna on a given continent, despite climatic differences, and the differences between fauna on different continents under the same climate, are proof of common descent and subsequent modification. The presence of endemic species on islands and the absence of certain classes of animals there, like amphibians, confirms the theory of accidental colonization and evolution in isolation. Understanding this dynamics allows us to look at the map of the world not as a static picture, but as a frame from a film capturing a moment of great, ceaseless migration. Species press against each other, cross borders, conquer new lands, and give way to stronger ones. It is a theater of war and migration that has lasted since the dawn of time. All these threads, evidence from breeding, from the struggle for existence, from anatomy, from instinct, from geology and geography, now weave together into one thick rope. We are approaching the end of our journey. It remains for us to gather all these arguments and look at the great picture emerging from the darkness of ignorance. The picture of the tree of life. Chapter 26. The hidden bond. Since the time of Linnaeus, naturalists have endeavored to arrange the living world into systematic drawers. They created classes, orders, families, and genera. In doing so, they were guided by an instinct that told them certain animals are closer to one another than others. But what does this likeness truly mean? Is it merely a whim of the creator, varying a single musical theme in 1,000 ways? Or does this arrangement conceal a deeper meaning? Darwin tears the veil from this mystery. Classification, he says, is nothing other than genealogy. When we group organisms into a natural system, we do not arrange them according to superficial resemblance. For then we would have to place the whale beside the fish, and yet we know it is a mammal. We arrange them according to blood relationship. The common feature that unites the lion, the cat, and the tiger is not an abstract plan, but a legacy from a common ancestor. The closer in time this ancestor lived, the more similar his descendants are. Genera are young branches. Families are older branches. Orders are mighty boughs that diverged millions of years ago. What we call the natural system is, in essence, a great genealogical tree of living beings. This arrangement is hierarchical, just as a family is hierarchical. Cousins, siblings, parents, grandparents. All the intricacies of systematics suddenly become clear when we understand that every shared trait, from the structure of the spine to the arrangement of petals in a flower, is a testament to a shared history, not an arbitrary design. Chapter 27. Hand and Wing. The most powerful evidence for this community is hidden beneath the skin. It is the argument from morphology, the science of forms. Look at the hand of a man, the wing of a bat, the flipper of a porpoise, and the leg of a horse. The functions of these limbs are extremely different. Grasping, flying, swimming, running. And yet, when we look inside, we see the same arrangement of bones, the same muscles, the same nerves. Why? If every species was created separately, why did the Creator use the same bones to build a wing and a flipper? When engineering would suggest completely different solutions for air and water. Why do all mammals, from the giraffe with its long neck to the whale, which has almost no neck, have exactly 7 cervical vertebrae? The theory of natural selection explains this instantly. These animals have such a structure because they inherited it from a common ancestor who possessed limbs of just such a plan. Natural selection can modify the shape of bones, lengthen them, shorten them, thicken them, but it cannot easily change their basic plan, nor create something entirely new ex nihilo. Nature is like an architect who rebuilds an old building for new needs. She does not demolish it to the foundations, but adapts what already stands. That is why in the wing of a bird we still see fingers, though fused and changed, and in the flipper of a whale, a hand is still hidden. This phenomenon, called homology, is the seal of common origin impressed in the body of every vertebrate. Chapter 28. Silent Letters. Even more eloquent are organs that serve no purpose. These are the so-called rudimentary organs. Many beetles living on islands have fused wing cases and never fly. And yet, Beneath these cases, membranous wings are still found, so small and flimsy that they are useless. Deep within the whale's muscles, small bones of the pelvis and hind legs are hidden. The boa constrictor possesses remnants of hind limbs beneath its skin. What is an organ for if the animal does not use it? Would an engineer add wheels to a machine that do not turn and are hidden inside the bodywork? From the point of view of creation, this is nonsense. From the point of view of evolution, it is a truism. These organs are souvenirs. They are like silent letters in the spelling of words. In the word debt, we do not pronounce the B, but that letter tells us of the word's etymology. Likewise, teeth in a whale fetus, which disappear before birth, tell us, my ancestors had teeth. These organs are slowly disappearing because they are no longer needed. Natural selection ceases to care for them, or even favors their reduction, so that the organism does not waste energy on building something superfluous. But the process of atrophy is slow. Rudiments are a testament to a past that the organism has not yet managed to completely erase. Chapter 29. The Embryo Remembers. However, we take the deepest journey into the past, not in a museum, but under a microscope, observing the development of the embryo. Von Baer, a distinguished physiologist, noticed that in the early stage of development, the embryos of mammals, birds, reptiles, and fish are so similar to each other that it is difficult to tell them apart. A young human embryo has a tail and gill slits on the neck, just like a fish. Why does a being destined to become the crown of creation begin its path as a little fish? Darwin answers, because ontogeny, the development of the individual, is a shortened recapitulation of phylogeny, the development of the race. The embryo is like a living historical record. In early stages, it reveals the form of ancestors. Evolutionary changes usually are superimposed on later stages of development. That is why adult animals differ drastically from one another, but their embryos betray their common roots. It is embryology, according to Darwin, that provides the strongest facts in support of the theory of evolution. It shows that the community of the living world is not just a theory. It is physically realized in the body of each of us before we even come into the world. Chapter 30. A Grand View. We are reaching the end of our tale. We have travelled the road from the pigeon loft and garden, through the struggle for existence in the wild forest, through the darkness of geological ages, to anatomy and embryonic development. All these paths converge at one point. All indicate that species are not immutable, but are the descendants of other species. This theory, although it strips nature of a certain mythical aura, gives it in return an extraordinary majesty. We no longer see a separate miracle in every species, but we see one great, unbroken process that has lasted since the dawn of time. We see how, from the war of nature, from famine and death, the highest object which we are capable of conceiving directly phonos, the production of the higher animals. The world is not a static decoration. It is a theatre pulsating with dynamic life, in which every actor has their role, shaped by millions of years of trial and error. These laws act around us at every moment. When we look at a tangled riverbank, clothed with plants, singing with birds, full of insects and worms, we must remember that these elaborately constructed forms, so different from each other and dependent on each other in so complex a manner, have all been produced by laws acting around us. Charles Darwin ends his work with words that have become the testament of modern science. Words that combine humility before the might of the universe with pride in discovering its mechanism. There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers, having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one. And that, whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been, and are being, evolved. Thus, from simplicity, infinity is born. Thus, by way of natural selection, the world we know came to be.